Okay, so before I show you all the things that could possibly make your videos and films look more cinematic, there's something you need to understand. And do not skip this, because I'll know if you skip this just by reading your comment, so don't. What you need to understand is that cinematicness and whether or not something looks cinematic is subjective. Look, if I take this mandarin here, this not so good looking mandarin, but anyway, and I put it on my desk and then film it with my smartphone, and then I tell you that this is the most cinematic looking mandarin footage I've ever seen, then I'm right. Then this is the most cinematic looking mandarin footage I've ever seen. But if you think it's not, then you're also right. It's subjective. You know what I mean? But that being said, there are standards, there are guidelines, things on which there is a consensus in the film industry and among filmmakers that they make an image look more cinematic. Not rules, just guidelines. Okay, now that this is clear, here we go. And let's start with the camera settings, because that's where it all starts, right? Before you hit record, you need to set up your camera. And in the movie industry, the preferred frame rate, the standard, is still 24 frames per second. Some directors have experimented with faster frame rates, 60, 120, but overall, 99% of the time, it's 24 frames per second. If you use a higher frame rate, you might notice something called the soap opera effect. Everything looks too smooth and too real for a movie. But again, it's totally subjective. Some people hate 24 frames per second. Now, if you're gonna use 24 frames per second to shoot your video or your film or whatever, the guidelines say that your shutter speed should be double that. So 1/48th or 1/50th, depending on your camera. Or if your camera has shutter angle, a 180-degree shutter angle. And the shutter speed will affect the motion blur. And setting the shutter speed at double the frame rate gives you the most natural looking motion blur. If you set a slower shutter speed, there will be too much motion blur. And if you set a faster shutter speed, there will be less or no motion blur at all. And since our eyes also see motion blur in real life, the best option is to go for the most natural looking motion blur, of course. So the standard still is 24 frames per second. And a shutter speed that's double that, 1/48th or 1/50th. And that's for real-time footage, of course, not slow motion. If you want to shoot slow motion, you have to use higher frame rates. But again, this is not a rule. Some people like to set the frame rate at 30 frames per second and then the shutter speed at 1/50th instead of 1/60th. That also works. If you like that, go for it. If you make films for yourself, you can do whatever you want. And then there's also the lenses, of course. First of all, there's the aperture setting of the lens you're using. A low aperture number, so a wide aperture, will give you a very blurry background, and a high number or small opening will give you a less blurry or sharper background. And also the focal length affects the blurriness of the background. Longer focal lengths will give you a blurrier background. If you frame a shot exactly the same with both a wide focal length and a long focal length, at the same aperture, the shot with a long focal length will have a blurrier background. But it's not just the blurry background that will look different, also the perspective. So always keep that in mind. But here's the thing, there's no such thing as a cinematic aperture or a cinematic focal length. In a movie, you'll see shots with blurry backgrounds and shots with sharp backgrounds, long focal length shots and wide focal length shots. It all depends on what story and emotion you're trying to convey. That's it. There's not one magical cinematic combination. Now, that being said, there is something that you'll almost never see on a movie set, and that's a photography lens. On a movie set, they use cinema lenses, specifically designed for making movies, to be used with a focus pulling system, with super accurate manual focus. But cinema lenses usually also give you a different look. It all looks a bit more organic and cinematic. And then I'm not even talking about anamorphic lenses, which will give you a super distinct look. So maybe you should try a cinema lens. So something you've probably heard of is a mist filter, right? You put it on your lens and it will raise the shadows, lower the highlights of the footage, and it will make everything look a bit softer and, yeah, more cinematic. Highlights also get this nice glow, and some people like it, some people don't. But it's something you see a lot here on YouTube. What they use on a movie set is actual mist or haze or fog to get a specific cinematic look. So a mist filter is basically the small filmmakers or creators' way to get that look, but you can also achieve that look in post, in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro, for example. So a mist filter does give you a cinematic look, but it's subjective. I like them. I'm using one right now, actually. And you know, it's also easier to use a mist filter when you're traveling, for example, than taking a whole fog machine. right? So yeah. And then there's light, probably the most important thing in photography, filmmaking, and videography. Light. Light will make or break a cinematic look because, first of all, you need to know how light works, how to expose your footage. Your footage exists because of light. But secondly, there's also dozens of different types of light and lighting setups, and some look more cinematic than others. There's a reason why in movies you'll see a lot of backlight, for example. There's just something about that look, that 3D look of backlight that's very pleasing. It looks cool. But also the time of day is super important because generally it's easier to get cinematic looking footage when you shoot at night or in the evening, sunset or sunrise. So golden hour when everything looks nice and warm and golden, or blue hour. But again, it's all subjective, and there are plenty of movies that were shot in the desert, for example, in super bright sunlight at noon. It's just more difficult to get good looking footage because you'll probably need reflectors and extra lights and things like that to light your scene. But if there's one thing, in my opinion, that affects the cinematicness of your videos and your images the most, it's light. By far. Learn light. Natural light, artificial light, learn all the light. I'm gonna keep saying it until you get tired of it. Okay, and here's one of the biggest misconceptions that beginners often have. A good cinematic color grade will make your footage look instantly cinematic. No. If you don't pay attention to all the other things I've mentioned in this video, a cool color grade won't make the difference. Your footage will still look bad. But on the other hand, a bad color grade can instantly ruin good footage. You see, the thing with color grading is that it's the cherry on top. It allows you to emphasize or convey a mood or an atmosphere. And there are standards. A romantic comedy usually looks completely different compared to a horror movie. Teal and orange is also something that's often used, but in the end, it's all subjective. What do you like? There's no such thing as a cinematic color grade. There are hundreds, but it's definitely super important to learn how to color grade. And not only the color grade is important, but also the colors that you use for set dressing and the clothes of your talents. It will all affect the final look of your image, of your film. Lots of movies have a color palette, meaning that they use the same colors throughout the movie. So learning about color theory is super important if you really want to get the details of your film or video or whatever right. Also for color grading, by the way, color theory is super important. Contrasting colors, complementing colors, warm, cold, learn it. And then finally, it's not just what you see, what's in your face that makes a video or a film or a movie look cinematic. There's also editing, for example. Good editing can make or break a film, and it's a bit more subtle, but it makes a huge difference. Bad editing can make a good story and good idea feel like a stupid home video. And also, music and sound design will affect what your movie looks and feels like, because cinematicness is not just a visual thing, it's also a feeling. It's emotional. A good movie should not only look cinematic, but also feel cinematic. You know what I mean? And good sound design and music choice make all the difference. So, you see, there's not just one thing that will make your videos look more cinematic. It's a combination of many things, and most importantly, there's not one magical combination. It all depends on what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to convey, the mood, the story, everything. And most importantly, it's also all subjective. Never let anyone tell you that you have to do this or that to make your videos look more cinematic. If you don't like it, it's not more cinematic. It's as simple as that. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. And now stop worrying about the cinematicness of your footage. Just go film something. That's even more important. Go create something right now. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one.